Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's July 15th, 2025 in New Varshana in Auckland, New Zealand. We're reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 10, Text 15, and this is prose, so we're not going to do it responsibly. I'm just going to read through it. Sachapi pandaveya sindhu sariya patistata jigna sayam samnyak shradhaya drikti di karas tad dridaya granti mochanam dvijavacha asrucha bahu yoga granta samantad twar ayavaruha shirasha pada mulam upashrita shama payam vigata nripa deva smaya uvacha. And this has fallen from its appropriate place. Saha, he, Maharaj Rahugana. Cha, also. Api, indeed. Pandaveya, O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Pariksit. Sindhu Sovira Patihi, the king of the states known as Sindhu and Sovira. Tattva Jignasayam, in the matter of inquiring about the absolute truth. Samyak Shradhaya, by faith consisting of complete control of the senses and the mind. Adhikrita adhikaraha, who attained the proper qualification. Tat, that. Hridaya granti, the knot of false conceptions within the heart. Mochanam, which eradicates. Dvijavachaha, the words of the Brahmana Jada-bharata. Ashrutya, hearing. Bahu Yoga Granta Samatam, approved by all yogic processes and their scriptures. Twaraya, very hastily. Avaruya, getting down from the palanquin. Shirasha, by his head. Padamulam, at the lotus feet. Upashristaha, falling down flat to offer obeisances. Shamapayan, obtaining pardon for his offense. Vigata nripa deva smaya, giving up the false pride of being the king and therefore being worshipable. Uvacha, said. Srila Prabhupada's translation. Sukadeva Goswami continued, O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Pariksit, the king of the Sindhu and Sovira states, Maharaj Rahugana, had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Now this must have been the reason why Jada Bharata decided to speak to him. Because again, this was the first person in his whole life Jada Bharata had ever spoken to. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jada Bharata that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process and which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jada Bharata in such a way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmana. He then prayed as follows. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In Bhagavad Gita 4.2, the Lord says, Evam parampara praptam iman raja sayo vidu sa kale neha mahata yoga nasta parantapa. The supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it is appears to be lost. Through the disciplic succession, the royal order was on the same platform as great saintly persons, Raja Rishis. Formally, they could understand the philosophy of life and knew how to train the citizens to come to the same standard. In other words, they knew how to deliver the citizens from the entanglement of birth and death. When Maharaj Dasarath ruled Ayodhya, the great sage Visvamrita once came to him to take away Lord Ramachandra and Lakshmana to the forest to kill a demon. When the saintly person Visvamrita came to the court of Maharaj Dasarath, the king, in order to receive the saintly person, asked him, Ahishtam tat tat punar janma jaya. He asked the sage whether everything was going on well in his endeavor to conquer the repetition of birth and death. Now it's not a point Prabhupada's making in this purport, but elsewhere he makes the point that the king asked the sage, how are you doing in conquering birth and death? And the sage asked the king, how's everything going with your kingdom? That question should be asked according to a person's varna and ashram. So he often quotes this in that context, although that's not the context he's quoting it in right now. He asked the sage whether everything was going on well in his endeavor to conquer the repetition of birth and death. The whole process of Vedic civilization is based on this point. We must know how to conquer the repetition of birth and death. Maharaj Rahugana also knew the purpose of life. Therefore, when Jadabharata put the philosophy of life before him, he immediately appreciated it. This is the foundation of Vedic society. Learned scholars, brahmanas, saintly persons, and sages who were fully aware of the Vedic purpose advised the royal order how to benefit the general masses. And by their cooperation, the general masses were benefited. So there's supposed to be cooperation. Oh, Hare Krishna. Gopal says Haribo and offers his obeisances. So there's supposed to be cooperation between the different varnas, and there are specific ways in which these varnas are supposed to cooperate. Therefore, everything was successful. Maharaj Rahugana attained this perfection of understanding the value of human life. Therefore, he regretted his insulting words to Jadabharata, and he immediately descended from his palanquin and fell down at the lotus feet of Jadabharata in order to be excused and to hear from him further about the values of life known as Brahma Jignasa, inquiry into the absolute truth. At the present moment, high government officials are ignorant of the values of life, and when saintly persons endeavor to broadcast the Vedic knowledge, the so-called executives do not offer their respectful obeisances, but try to obstruct the spiritual propaganda. Thus one can say that the former kingly government was like heaven, and that the present government is like hell. So I'm not going to read through the Sanskrit again, I'll just read the translation. Sukadeva Goswami continued, O best of the Pandu dynasty, Maharaj Parikshit, the king of the Sindhu and Sovira states, Maharaj Rahugana, had great faith in discussions of the absolute truth. Being thus qualified, he heard from Jadabharata that philosophical presentation which is approved by all scriptures on the mystic yoga process and which slackens the knot in the heart. His material conception of himself as a king was thus destroyed. He immediately descended from his palanquin and fell flat on the ground with his head at the lotus feet of Jadabharata, in such a way that he might be excused for his insulting words against the great Brahmana. He then prayed as follows. So we tend to think of kings as being just despots, right? Recently there was a protest in America against President Trump, and people went around with signs that said, "No kings." I don't know if you heard about that. So we have this concept that kings are intrinsically evil, that as soon as you have someone as a king, they're evil, and that our modern democratic governments are an improvement on the concept of kings. Now, it is true that the European kings became evil and corrupt. That's a fact. I mean, first you had, in Europe, you had the church was basically running the government through the kings, and the church became corrupt, and so many of the governments threw out the church, like you have in the UK, where they established the Anglican Church in opposition to the Roman Catholic Church. And the Roman Catholic Church was going around persecuting and torturing people all over the world. Today we think of Muslim terrorists, but in those days they were Catholic terrorists. Yes, everybody studied history? So they were thrown out, and then the kings took absolute power, but they were corrupt. So then they were thrown out. And we think now we're at an advantage, so we may think like that. But if we go to far ancient times, and not even that ancient, I mean, a few thousand, you don't have to go back millions of years ago, even just a few thousand years ago, we had a time when there were righteous government, as Prabhupada says here, Rajarshis, who were advised by righteous brahmanas. In fact, the government leaders, they were also Raja Rishis, they were also saintly. In fact, everyone's supposed to be saintly. So Krishna wants everybody to be saintly. Krishna wants the gardeners to be saintly and the electricians to be saintly, right? I don't know what that term would be. Saintly electricians. You can have it on your truck. The Rishi Electrical Company. Pavaka. So Pavaka Rishis. Pavarshis. Pavakarshis. But Krishna especially wants the leaders to be saintly. So everybody should be saintly, but Krishna is very invested in the leaders. Right? Prabhupada's quoting Evam Parampara Prapto Iman Rajarshayi. Krishna was giving this parampara that he's talking about to Arjuna, not through the Brahmanas, but through the Kshatriyas. So especially Krishna wants the leaders to be saintly, and this would be the leaders in all fields. And if there's some discrepancy in our duty, part of being saintly is what Maharaj Rahugana is doing here. You mess up, you fix it. That's part of being saintly. You mess up, you fix it. Even great saintly persons sometimes mess up, like Maharaj Pariksit, who messed up with Shamaka Rishi. Mess up, you fix it. Right. So Krishna wants everyone to be saintly, but especially leaders. So it's not that when you become saintly, you give up your position in society. If all the saintly persons give up their position in society and go to the forest, then who's going to lead the people? So Krishna tells Arjuna, stay in your position as a saintly person. Correct? And if there are no saintly leaders, like with Priyavrata, then the Lord may even grab some saintly person out of seclusion and say, hey, go be a leader. I mean, if there's absolutely no saintly persons, Krishna will himself manifest as the leader. He'll become Lord Brahma to be the leader, or he'll become Lord Ramachandra to be the leader. I mean, think of how important it is to Krishna that those who are working in the world as leaders are saintly. He'll do it himself if no one else is doing it. So he tells Arjuna, I want you to set an example. I want you to lead others. I find it fascinating that Prahlad Maharaj, he's rejecting this diplomatic instruction given by Sunda and Amarka. He said, I'm not interested in this friends and enemies business. And then Lord Nrsingadev says, you become the leader. And Prahlad as the leader definitely is going to have to deal with friends and enemies. That's something that a leader has to do. It's part of their job. But he's dealing with it without actually seeing people as friends and enemies. I mean, this is the whole crux of this discussion of the Nrsinga pastime. Prahlad is dealing with it as a Rajarshi. So Krishna very much wants that. Yes? And we find that throughout the Bhagavatam, and the Bhagavad Gita, there's so much care to ensure that the leaders are qualified, that there's some succession of leaders and that they're qualified, the training of the youth. The leaders, they want to have good children and they want them to be trained properly to take over and to run things. And of course, leaders among business and leaders among the artisans should also be exemplary. This was true in ancient times. Nanda Maharaj was a leader among the Vaishyas. Sometimes devotees misunderstand that as soon as you're a manager or a leader, that makes you a Kshatriya. But Nanda Maharaj was a leader. I mean, he was actually called King Nanda. But he wasn't a king, he wasn't a Kshatriya, he was a Vaishya. And Krishna is very happy that he has a Vaishya leader who's also a great devotee. Yes? I mean, if we can imagine, let's say that the leaders in society were all Vaishnavas. Let's say the people running, Amazon and Walmart and Monsanto, and suppose they were all Vaishnavas. Wouldn't that be nice? That would be really nice. And suppose the leaders, the sports heroes and the music stars, if they were all Vaishnavas. Like, what effect did it have that George Harrison became a Vaishnava? It helped bring me to the Hare Krishna movement. I mean, that he produced the Radha Krishna Temple album, which was my second contact with Krishna consciousness, was hearing Yamuna sing Brahma Samhita on the radio. He produced that. And then coming out with My Sweet Lord and bringing the Hare Krishna mantra to the world. Prabhupada was happy that Allen Ginsberg was chanting Hare Krishna. Prabhupada told Peter Burwash, who was a tennis player, he said, play tennis for Krishna. Prabhupada wants Krishna wants. Again, especially those who are influential in some way, those who have some power in the society, some influence in the society, to be saintly persons. Again, suppose we woke up, tomorrow morning and that was what happened. The political leaders were all saintly persons. And the leading scientists and the leading educators were all saintly persons. And the leading business people and the leading artisans and entertainers and tradespersons were all saintly persons. That would change the whole world, wouldn't it? Yes? So Krishna's very invested in this. Again, he wants everybody, but at least those who are influential. It's something very important. So it's not just the form of government, it's the type of person. You can have a democracy with a demoniac person in charge, and it's not any better than an autocracy. I mean, you can say, well, then they don't have much power. People think that democracy is just about the fact that we've elected the leaders, but that's not the only feature of democracy. Another feature is that we've stripped our leaders of power. At least the way we have our democracy set up in the United States. The way it's supposed to be set up is that we've given the leaders the least amount of power, like the minimum they need to rule. We have this division of power. We have the judicial and the legislative and the executive, and there's all these checks and balances on their power. Right now, we have a leader in America who's trying to test the limits of that and trying to see if he can override the other branches. And to some extent, he's being successful, but to some extent, he's not. To some extent, he makes some edict, and the courts say, no, you can't do that. And they stop it, and there's some checks on their power. There's checks on their power just that they have to keep getting reelected, that they can't stay there for life. So we're basically saying, okay, we have corrupt, demoniac, incompetent leaders, but we still need a leader, so we're going to cripple them. We need a leader, but we're going to cripple you so that you can't lead very much. And these leaders, they get actually quite frustrated with that. You see that. You see people get into a political position and they think, even if they want to do good, they get in that position and they see their arms and legs are tied up. And they can't. So, okay, I guess if you're going to have corrupt, demoniac leaders, it's better to have them armless and legless. Then they can't do that much harm. But they can't do that much good either. Is this making sense? We've crippled their ability to do good because we figure that they're corrupt. So wouldn't it be better to have leaders who were not corrupt and actually had the capacity to do good? That would be better. We might think, well, that's impossible. But that's what we're trying to do. Srila Prabhupada started this Hare Krishna movement in part to produce people who could be the leaders of society. and to have us train others who could be the leaders of society. That's why he said a Varnashram college in every center. That we could train people. This is how to be a proper Brahmana, how to be a proper Kshatriya, how to be a proper Vaishya, how to be a proper Shudra, how to be saintly in your occupation so that you can change the world. Yeah? So how does this work? I mean, Prabhupada talks about this cooperation between the Varnas in this purport. He's specifically talking about the cooperation between the Brahmanas and the Kshatriyas. Because you didn't just have a Rajarshi, but you had a Rajarshi who knew how to work with the Brahmanas. Even if the king was as qualified as a Brahmana in terms of spiritual realization. I don't think there's any doubt that Nanda Maharaj is as qualified as a Brahmana in spiritual realization. Would any of us doubt that for a moment? No. More qualified than an ordinary Brahmana. Or in Mathura, you have the weaver or the tailor. Makes more sense to me that he was a tailor. In Krishna book, Prabhupada called him a tailor, and somehow later in the 10th canto, the BBT translators called him a weaver. But I don't know why he would be a weaver. Because Krishna and Balaram got this cloth from the washerman after killing the washerman, and then they gave it to a tailor to make it into clothes, because it was just bolts of cloth. So why would they have given it to a weaver? But the tailor and the florist, they were also, right? They were doing Shudra work, but were they more saintly, or more saintly than a Brahmana, right? They all knew Brahman. And there was a way of cooperation between the different Varnas. Each Varna is supposed to cooperate with the others. Just like in our body, the different organs of our body cooperate with each other. Sometimes you have doctors who just specialize in one part of the body, correct? They're not looking holistically. Just like I was very fortunate by Krishna's grace that I was able in London, my hand had already been broken for a couple weeks, but I got to see an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in shoulders, elbows, hands. That's the name of his website, Shoulders, Elbows, Hands. So he and his wife came to see me, and he was examining my hand, and I said, "Do you ever work on legs?" And he says, "Oh, not very often." And we were kind of joking, you know, his wife was saying, pretty soon it's just going to be the little finger of the left hand that he focuses on. You know? So you have these doctors who focus just on one thing. Like I went to see a cornea specialist, and I said, "Am I getting cataracts?" And she said, "No." And later on, when I went to see the general eye doctor, he said, "You know, you're starting to get cataracts." And I said, "Well, the cornea specialist told me no." And he laughed. And he said, "Well, they're just looking at the cornea. The cataract is behind the pupil. The cornea is in front of it. They're just looking at a part of it." So you can't just look at the Varnas in and of themselves. Right? I remember when my mother was at the end of her life, when her health was failing, she was getting terrible stomach aches. And it turned out that it was the medication she was taking for other things. You know, she stopped taking 2/3 of her medicine and her stomach aches went away. Because there was no one looking at her holistically. She didn't have any overall doctor who was seeing how do all these medications work together? How are the organs influencing each other? If someone just concentrated on the pancreas, you know, and they're not thinking about how is that affecting the lungs. So also these different Varnas have to cooperate with each other. So how do they do that? How do they cooperate with each other? So the Brahmanas are supposed to give guidance to society. They're like the head of the society. They're giving the vision for the society. They're giving the guidance. But they're not directly involved in instituting that vision. They're not directly involved in instituting that guidance. You follow? We were reading the other day one quote where Prabhupada was saying that we're trying to build a temple and we don't just want a bunch of Brahmanas. They'll just say Hare Krishna, and nothing will get done. Because they're not so much the doers. They're doers as teachers and as doctors, but they're not so much instituting things in society. I tell people, if you think everybody should be a Brahmana, then you're just going to have floating heads. First of all, that's a dead body. And second of all, that nothing can happen. But that has to give the guidance. And then you have the Kshatriyas or the arms. And the arms, not just, in English, the word arms also means weapons. So people sometimes have this idea that Kshatriyas are all walking around with swords. But Kshatriyas are also, they're providing the care. They're always compared to the mothers and fathers of society. They're caring for society like a parent. They're seeing all the citizens as their children. So yes, parents have to be prepared sometimes to put their kids in timeout, and maybe they might have to be prepared to protect their children from predators and evil. They may have to make sure there's a good lock on the door or something like that, and vet the people who take care of their children. But that's not all that they do. They're also making sure their children have what they need. They're making sure the children get a good education and that they have proper clothing and proper food and they have toys to play with and they have friends to play with and they have playgrounds to go to and parks to go to, right? They're making sure they have everything they need and that they have spiritual guidance. They're taking care of them in a holistic way. So the Kshatriyas are the main people. They're managing all of society. It may be on a small level. Maybe they're a police officer who's in charge of a particular block or a particular area of justice, or a social worker who makes sure that people are in touch with justice, or they're in the parliament making the laws, or like Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, they're a judge making sure the laws are properly enforced. But in some way, they're protecting the people. They're taking the spiritual advice from the Brahmanas and they're putting it into practical action for the people. And they, in turn, are making sure the Brahmanas are actually Brahmanas. They're making sure no one's cheating. In our modern society, the government makes sure that people who are practicing medicine have a medical license, that people who are acting as teachers have a teaching license. But that concept that the Brahmanas are not cheated, or not cheating, that the Brahmanas follow the laws. In our ISKCON society, that would mean follow the New Zealand laws, but also following the ISKCON laws. And then we have the Brahmanas are also guiding the Vaishyas. You have, biologists and soil scientists and people studying the flora and the fauna and the soil and the environment, and then guiding the Vaishyas, or economists who are coming up with understanding of how the economy should work. So then the Vaishyas can take that understanding from the Brahmanas and institute it. They can institute it in how they're taking care of the soil and the animals and the water, or how they're taking care of banking and trade. And in turn, the Vaishyas are supporting the Brahmanas. And the Kshatriyas are making sure, under the guidance of the Brahmanas, that the Vaishyas are following the law. So the Kshatriyas may also have to have laws about protecting the environment and laws about protecting the animals. And then the Vaishyas are supporting the Kshatriyas through their taxes and supporting the Brahmanas through their charity. I mean, again, we don't just have a perversion right now in government. We have a perversion right now in all the Varnas. So the Brahmanas who are supposed to be teaching economic understanding are saying, oh, economics has nothing to do with land anymore. That's an antiquated concept. Let's divorce economic understanding from land. That was a deliberate decision of the economists. Let's just promote unlimited economic growth. And then the Vaishyas, who are supposed to be guided by the Brahmanas, are going, okay, let's go for growth. Let's give loans to unqualified people. Let's give mortgages to unqualified people. That was the source of the 2008 economic collapse. People who couldn't pay off their mortgages were given mortgages. And then people were investing in mortgages. And the whole system, it was like dominoes, it all collapsed. Or growth. Oh, let's feed the animals antibiotics. Let's feed the animals hormones. So they'll grow, fast. Let's pour nitrates, artificial nitrates, into the soil. Let's just pour pesticides, artificial pesticides into the soil. Weed killers into the soil. Growth, 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 growth. Oh my, our farm workers are all coming down with cancer. The rivers are all polluted. Right? The soil's polluted. The food we're eating doesn't have nutrition in it anymore. You know, we're thinking we're eating a balanced diet, and then we go to the doctor and find out we're vitamin deficient. Wait a minute, I'm eating all healthy food. How am I vitamin deficient? Because the food isn't real food anymore. Because the economists are pushing growth, 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 growth. And growth, 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 then that's affecting the Sudras, who are thinking I have to grow, 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 grow. And the Sudras are thinking, okay, well, I've just got to do cheap goods in quantity. So everybody can have lots and lots and lots and lots of cheap goods, and then we all have more stuff than we can use and we need that's just going from the shop to the landfill. I don't know if you study about what's happening with clothing. You know, change the fashion, change this, change that. And just piles and piles of clothing. So the Shudras are being misguided by the Brahmanas. And then the Shudras are supposed to be producing pleasures for the world. They're producing the arts, the music, the dance, the drama. Okay? But when the Brahmanas are corrupt and not guiding properly, which makes the Kshatriyas corrupt, and exploitive, which makes the Vaishyas corrupt and being exploited, then the poor Shudras, they become corrupt. And then our entertainment is disgusting mostly, isn't it? Our music, our art, our sculpture, our drama, I think I can safely say that most of it is polluting. Would that be a reasonable assessment? That most of it is dragging people down into tamas, maybe rajas? How much of our modern arts and entertainment is in sattva? I'm sure some, but not much. And it's gotten so severe that we have to, you know, worry about our children being completely contaminated by the time they're like 10, 11 years old. And contaminated in ways that those of us who are older didn't even dream about. So there's supposed to be this kind of cooperation. The Sudras are supposed to be producing inspiring pleasures. Beautiful things. I mean, you do see this in Bali, where you see that the artisans, of course they do it for tourist money partially, but you see the artisans are all religiously connected, correct? Everything. The music, the art, the architecture, the landscaping, it's all connected to religion. It's amazing. Again, they're doing it for tourist dollars, at least to some extent. But you can get some sense of what it would look like. So that should be that kind of cooperation. And checks and balances. The Kshatriyas keep everyone in check through the laws. But it's supposed to be proper laws. The Vaishyas keep everyone in check through where they spend their money. They're going to say, I'm not going to give any money to this. Then it dries up. The Shudras have a check and balance for what they choose to depict in the arts. There can be some law, but if the law is corrupt, the Shudras can say, sorry, I'm not going to put this into my movie. I'm not going to put this into my music. I'm going to choose not to do this. Because in a proper society, each varna has a sense that they have to take care of the integrity of that whole varna. So in career dharma, we use the word cherish. You have to take care of it. If someone gives me a gift, I want to take care of it. Yes? So how do the Shudras, how do they cherish their field? They say, well, we're not going to compromise quality and integrity for profit or expediency. And I always use this example of it was a devotee project I saw in India, where the project managers wanted the project finished quickly and cheaply. And so instead of having stone carvers carve the stone, they had them mix fiberglass with concrete and pour it into molds to look like carved stone. And if those Shudras actually were cherishing their Varna, they would have refused. They would have said, we're not going to do this. This will pollute the whole Varna. Then the stone carvers won't be able to compete. They take much longer, they charge much more money, and if people can have artificially carved stone, it'll put the stone carvers out of business. Plus, it means we're making shoddy workmanship. Stone carving is going to last for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Fiberglass mixed with concrete is not. Plus, we're doing something toxic. It's going to poison us. Our body is a temple. We're not going to pollute our body just to make money. And the Vaishyas are going to say, we're going to protect. What are they going to protect? This is easy. Easy, easy, easy. What did the Vaishyas protect? The cows and the land. So if someone says, you know, you've got to pour all these chemicals into the land, they're going to say, no. You got to kill your cows. They're going to say, no, we're not going to do that. We have to cherish the integrity of our field. We're not going to engage in banking practices that are going to destroy the economy and destroy people's lives just so we can make more money faster. We're going to give people proper financial advice. We're going to have real investments in real things. We're going to trade in a way that's ethical. We're going to trade in a way that values the artisans. And again, as soon as the Vaishyas don't do that, it ruins the whole field. As soon as some people start killing their cows and some people start pouring chemicals, it makes it so much harder for the people doing it legitimately to compete. You know, then your ahimsa milk is so expensive. And you're thinking, my God, you know, maybe I'll just buy the regular milk at a cheaper price, right? And if there's somebody giving improper loans, then somebody might say, well, hey, you know, I want a house, I want a car. Let me just go there where I can get a loan, even though I'm not qualified. And then the economy implodes. And the Kshatriyas, they have to take care of their field by making sure they don't have any favoritism, even to their own wife, like Lord Ramachandra. They can't favor anybody. They have to make sure they protect everybody equally. That if there's a problem in the country, they give away everything. Again, like Ram and Sita, they gave away everything. Sita only had her nose ring left. Prabhupada talks about this in light of the Bhagavatam. They'll empty the treasury. By the way, the Vaishyas are never supposed to do that. Different dharma. They have to keep seeds for the next harvest. And the Kshatriya has to be willing to go into a challenge, lead the charge. That would stop a lot of wars if our prime ministers and presidents had to be at the front of the army, wouldn't it? Imagine if you said to the modern presidents and prime ministers, oh, you want to bomb this country? Great. Get in the fighter jet. You want to invade this country? Great. You be at the front. That you might get shot. I think a lot of them would go, maybe not. You're not willing to put your life on the line, then don't do it. And for the Brahmanas, they have to be willing to tell the truth, even when it may make them unpopular, even when it may make them get tortured or persecuted or jailed. Or they have to be silent. But they can't bend the truth just to make money, or just to be safe in some political environment, or just to be safe in a religious environment. Either silence or truth, whatever the cost. And again, if they don't, it pollutes the whole field. If people who are Brahmanas fudge their data so that they get paid by the pharmaceutical company, then nobody trusts the Brahmins anymore. And if you can't trust your eyes, how are you going to function? Yeah? Now, part of being a saintly person in any field is to be humble. And humility doesn't mean, I'm useless, I can't do anything. That's not humility. I always get a kick out of this one letter a disciple wrote to Srila Prabhupada, "You're eternally useless servant." Like, why would I want an eternally useless servant? You ever had somebody you tried to teach something to and after 20 attempts it didn't work? Did you keep working with them? No, of course not. So not like that. But one aspect of humility here is that if you mess up, you clean it up. We should all be taught this by our parents when we're little kids. You make a mess, you clean it up. Did our mommy teach us that? Did our daddy teach us that? You make a mess, you clean it up. Sometimes devotees take this apichet sutaracharo, or the instructions that, you know, the only prayaschitta you need to do is bhakti, to mean I don't need to clean up my messes. Oh, did I offend you? Oh, I'm just going to sit down and chant Hare Krishna. We don't see Maharaj Rahugana doesn't do that. He doesn't say, oh, I offended Jud Bharat. Well, I'm just going to worship the Lord. He gets off his high palanquin and he offers obeisances and he begs for forgiveness. He tries to clean it up. Durvasa Muni tried to not do that. He offends Ambarish and he tries to go to the Devas and to the Lord. And it doesn't work. The Lord's like, nope. Go clean up your mess. I'm not cleaning up your mess for you. Thinking God's going to clean up our mess for us is an offense. It's sinning on the strength of chanting. I'm going to do nonsense, and God's going to clean it up for me. That's like some entitled rich kid who gets arrested and just thinks, I can do whatever I want, and my daddy's going to bail me out of jail. I mean, Krishna might do that, but he doesn't like that. He doesn't want to be treated like that. That's treating Krishna as your servant. Okay, God, clean up all my messes. We have Gopal Chapala, where he offended Srivas Thakur. And he got leprosy, and he went to Lord Chaitanya, and he said, please free me. And Lord Chaitanya's like, no way. He said, not only am I not going to free you, you're going to have to be, whatever it was, a worm for 10 million births or something. I forget the details. And Mahaprabhu walked away in disgust. Later, he came back and saw Gopala Chapala again. And this time, Gopala Chapala said, what can I do to rectify? Instead of just save me. And Lord Chaitanya said, go to Srivas and rectify with him. One of the most fascinating examples to me is Suruchi. When Suruchi offends Dhruva, she doesn't know he's a great devotee. You could even arguably say that he wasn't a great devotee at that time. And he's given as one of the examples of a kanista adhikari, someone who's going to the Lord for wealth. And Suruchi really insults him. She's like, not only can you not inherit the kingdom because you're not my son, you can't even sit on your father's lap. You're not a real son. Only my children are real children of the king. And your only alternative is to worship the Lord, do austerities, and then take birth again as my kid. Whoa! For that, she had to die. Lord Vishnu tells Dhruva, says, your brother is going to be killed by the Yakshas, and your mother's going to go after him, and she's going to die. She never rectifies. It's really interesting when Dhruva comes back from the forest in triumph. Suruchi comes and says, long may you live. Long may you live, Dhruva. But she never rectifies. She doesn't clean up her mess. So King Rahugana messed up here in two ways. He messed up in terms of offending a great soul, and he also messed up in terms of the system of Varnashram. Of course, he didn't recognize Jad Bharata as a Brahmana, really. But he messed up in both ways. He messed up in the cooperation between the Varnas and his cherishing his Varna, and he also messed up in terms of offending a devotee. But because he's actually a Rajarshi, because he's actually a devotee, when he messes up, he fixes it. Now, of course, sometimes you can't fix it. Sometimes the person you offended has already left this world. Or sometimes the person you offended refuses to accept your fixing, which is what happened to King Riga. He tries to fix it, and the Brahmanas wouldn't accept his fix. They stayed offended. Of course, they shouldn't have stayed offended. That was actually a fault on their part. But you might say, well, then why did King Riga have to suffer? He certainly made a good faith attempt to fix his mistake, and it wasn't even an intentional mistake. But this is really interesting because when Riga comes before Yamaraj, you remember, and Yamaraj says to him, okay, you have a choice. He says, you have unlimited enjoyment, but you also have some suffering. What do you want first? And he wanted to do the suffering first, like we often eat the things we like the least first. Correct? But Prabhupada said he wasn't very intelligent because Yamaraj gave him a hint that his enjoyment was practically unlimited. So if he had picked, Prabhupada was saying, if he was intelligent, he would have actually said, let me take the unlimited enjoyment. And in that position of unlimited enjoyment, he could have come to bhakti and never had to go through the suffering at all. So instead he took the suffering, but because he was actually, to some extent, a devotee in that situation, of course, he got to be with Krishna, who picked him up, and he got to feel the left hand of Krishna grabbing him and picking him up and restoring him. So we should strive to be in our proper position and be an example of a saintly person in our proper position. How to be saintly in whatever position I have. And Srila Prabhupada wanted us, either directly or through guiding others, to set up the proper social system. Either we should guide those who have political power to do it, or we should do it ourselves, and at least we should do it in our own communities. And part of being a saintly person in whatever position we have is taking responsibility. Taking responsibility. If I offend people, if I break things, I damage relationships, I damage things, to do my best in good faith to try to fix it and not take the attitude of, well, I'm a devotee, so I don't have to fix it. We find even Madhai. He went to Lord Nityananda and he said, I really want to fix it. And Lord Nityananda said, you don't have to. Lord Chaitanya's already taken all your sins. Mahaprabhu's already cleaned up your messes are all cleaned up already. The slate's cleared, your debt's cleared, you don't have to do anything. And he said, yeah, but I don't feel right about it. And so Lord Nityananda says, well, and also Madhai said, he said, I was so intoxicated when I did all these crimes. I don't even remember who I offended anymore. I don't even know who it was, how to do it. And Lord Nityananda says, well, all right, why don't you build a bathing ghat to serve the devotees? And then Madhai was very, very, very pleased. So let us try to be saintly in whatever position we are, and let us try to actually, it's all right if we mess up. Even very great devotees mess up, yes? They do. Pariksit messed up. It's debatable whether or not Chitraketu messed up. We could debate that. Did he or did he not? But it happens. Srila Rupa Goswami considered that he messed up by laughing at a pastime while a disabled person was going past, and that person felt insulted, even though Srila Rupa Goswami didn't even know it or intend any insult. Still, he felt that he should take care of it.